do them is a couple reasons. One is because I think it's good to have sermons. I think sermons are they're a good kickstart. They're a good shot of adrenaline. Sermons are useful because they're sparks. But as you all know, do you remember what was spoken about 5 weeks ago? Probably not. And if you remember, don't say anything because it'll ruin my point. It's because in the moment it's a spark, and that's okay that you don't remember it. Maybe some of you maybe write some notes down. For anything like me, I write a lot of notes that I never look at. Yeah. But I write those notes. You know what I mean? It does help me internalize it. Sometimes I'll go look at it, but I think sermons are very important, and they need to be quality and they need to be there. At the same time, I think hearing people's lives is very powerful. In fact, there are parts of the Bible that the only thing is just someone talking about their life. There are times when it's just chapters of Paul just explaining his life. Or in the Old Testament, you're just following the prophets around when they do their thing. And I think there are times where, in my view, doing interviews is a way for us to trust each other, to trust the congregation, so to speak, to glean whatever it is you need to glean from it. And each interview has a different flavor. And I asked Chelsea today to do this interview with me because I wanted specifically to talk about her relationship with Mike. And the reason for that is because I think relationships are, other than salvation, the greatest blessing that God can give you is a husband or a wife in the kingdom. But also, the number one reason that people walk away from God, in my experience, is they leave God for a relationship. For all kinds of reasons, right? But that's the number one thing, and it's a nuanced thing, but I think it's true. And so I have a lot of respect for Mike and Chelsea's marriage, and the reason for that is because of how they conducted themselves before they were married. It's how it works, right? You cultivate great things in your life. I've talked about that before. So what I want to do is I'm going to ask Chelsea a bunch of questions. I did give her these in advance. She spent a little time working on it, so she may have a couple notes, but then we're going to throw some curveballs. I don't have those curveballs prepared. All right, we all ready? Chelsea, feeling good? All right, so maybe I won't throw any curveballs. So I want to start and give you a chance to share briefly about your upbringing, but I want to ask a specific question about your upbringing. Not just how is your upbringing in general, but what were the primary factors in your upbringing that shaped the way you think about romance and relationships in particular? So, take it away.
Yeah. I was raised in California, but in a very small town called California City. We had less than 15,000 people, so very tiny. And it was great because I had my grandma and my grandpa there that also helped raise us. So I had that relationship that I saw, but I also had my mom and my dad's relationship. And the relationships they had were very much it's a partnership. I didn't really see them really enjoy each other's company. It was kind of like they agreed to just take care of us, and that's what kept them together. So it was interesting to me because I just thought relationships weren't romantic at all. You kind of just exist to make money and take care of the things or people that you have in your lives. And I also didn't get to see really what a real marriage looked like because my dad was gone for most of our lives. He was working a high-end job to provide for us, which was great, but it also came at a great sacrifice. He was gone 6 to 8 months out of the year. So it was mainly just my mom. So my mom, I just saw, she made it work, but I also could see she wished it was different. I could see she wanted more from the marriage she had with my dad, but she felt stuck. So it kind of was this weird thing for me where honestly, I didn't really want relationships growing up because it didn't make sense to me and I didn't fully understand it. And I also didn't get to see what a real husband was either because my dad wasn't really around, so he couldn't really show that example. We also weren't raised with faith. I grew up never hearing about God. We didn't go to church, never knew about the Bible. So their kind of way of bringing us up was wise in their own eyes, doing the best they can, kind of go as life goes. There was not really a strong core foundation. They were kind of just getting by with as kids. So that's kind of how I saw relationships.
So your parents mostly were bonded through you.
Yeah, just kids.
And how many siblings?
3.
I actually didn't know that. It was one of those questions you
Yes.
asked because I didn't think
Yes.
you knew. And where are you in the list?
I'm the oldest, and then my sister and I are 14 months apart, and then my brother and I are 2 years apart. So
How many
very close.
firstborns are there in the house?
Oh wow, that's
Yeah.
not that many.
And then how many middle children who've just forgotten their whole life? And then how many youngest kids who just have That explains a lot.
There's a reason we're here.
Some of the entitlement I felt, from Max. Obviously, like how we're raised, our what we observe from our parents is probably a lot more powerful than what they tell you. And I think that's often true. Like I know that's true with my kids. Like I can say something, but if I act differently, they'll call me on it. And so I wonder, you chose to follow Jesus, and I know that's a great story, but we're not going to ask specifically about that because of time. But what I do want to ask is, let me get my question right. Before you made the choice to follow Jesus, were you in any relationships, and what were those like?
Yeah, I mean, that's the ironic thing is I said I didn't want any relationships, but I was in a lot of relationships before then. Because I just didn't get that love from my dad, I desperately seeked it out. And so those relationships were a mess. A lot of them, almost all of them, they were transactional, they were self-seeking, they were emotionally abusive, and they were manipulative. And so they were very much defined by what you get out of things, and it was also very focused on physical affection too. And so I never felt secure. I always felt incredibly insecure. I never felt like I could be who I was, because in order for me to receive love, I had to be or do whatever it was to be loved. And so it was very chaotic. I was never at peace, to say the least. I feel like I was always spinning a wheel or spinning a story or something. It reminds me of, there's a really great scripture I wanted to say, because it's kind of funny when you have me recall like what those were like, because it feels like a dream. Mm-hmm. Like I've been a disciple since 2010, yes, 2010, yes. So I was trying to remember all this, but I think this scripture really captured it again, and it's, I think it's Jeremiah 2:13. It says, "My people have committed 2 sins. They have forsaken me, the spring of living water, and have dug cisterns, their own cisterns that cannot hold water." In those relations, and so like it felt like we were creating these relationships to be fulfilled, but they never became fulfilled. It was just more and more, and you would lose yourself, and you would never feel satisfied or complete. So it was incredibly empty.
So that scripture in Jeremiah, for those of you who have never heard it before, Jeremiah is saying that God is providing living water like a river, which is, always more fresh, but instead they're digging cisterns, which is essentially just a hole in the ground that holds water. But, obviously, eventually that evaporates, it gets dirty. As more people use it, it gets infected and poisoned. And so you're saying that that's how you felt about your relationships. And you drew connection to the reason you sought after relationships. Because it's interesting, because you were like, I don't want to be in a relationship. Like, that's what you learned from your family. That's how you reacted. And yet, you found yourself, despite what you thought you wanted, seeking relationships out, and you tied that to sort of the lack of connection with your dad.
Completely.
How are you so sure of that? Like, what? By the way, that's a curve. I didn't say I was going to ask that question. But like, what makes you think that was the case?
I think it's because, of course, after you become a disciple, you kind of start working back through your life and trying to connect the dots of all these things. And I remember I read this book called His Image, My Image, and it was really good, and it talked about how the opposite sex parent is incredibly important from a certain age to help the other, for me, in that kind of relationship, to build security, identity, confidence. Like, that parent has a huge role in building that for you. And I read that and I was like, oh my goodness, no wonder I went after all these other men, because I was trying so hard to get security and confidence. But the way that God designs, parents is so that the dad can be able to help show that character of God and show that type of love that women are supposed to receive. Because that relationship, that love you receive from your dad feels it should be in God's way, like secure and confident and safe. And I just didn't get that.
Yeah, I wonder how many of us have felt that same thing, right? Like connecting dots of like, it's so true, your relationship with your parents is unknowingly connected to everything. Like, it's really easy to draw those correlations. And so it's just interesting that despite the fact that you were like, I don't want to do this, you found yourself going after it anyway. Which is, that happens. Like our upbringing impacts the way we live the rest of our life a lot.
Mm-hmm.
So tell us about when Mike came into the picture.
Yeah.
What were your first impressions of Mike?
Yeah, so I met Mike in 2012. And we were at a conference in San Antonio, Texas. So there was like over 10,000 people. So it was a lot
of options.
Lots of
I'm just kidding.
You can ask Mike. No, you can ask Mike that story. He kind of brags a little bit that he, went on the most dates, more than me. So, but yeah.
That's a good look for Mike.
Yeah. But it was great. So it was a lot of fun. And when you're in those big scenarios, you're just trying to find anybody that you know, so you don't feel like so overwhelmed.
Yeah, the social anxiety is really high.
Yes,
There's 8,000 people.
So high. Luckily, I had my sister, so her and I were attached to the hip. So Mike had run into my sister's boyfriend at the time, and they had worked together in San Diego for ministry. Mike was doing the teens, and Evan was working for the campus. And so Evan's like, I'm on my way to meet my girlfriend. You should come with me. We're all hanging out. And so he came to our hotel room, and it was a bunch of sisters, and then it was Evan and Mike. And I was really impressed first by his height and blue eyes. Obviously.
About the same way about my height. It's like a quarter inch shorter than her, and she always wanted.
But then I think what really stood out to me was there was a bunch of girls in that room. And he did such a great job of including all the girls. Like, he never was like picking one girl out and just talking to her. Like, he included the conversation. And I was just so impressed how he would handle himself in such a room full of girls. It's really intimidating. And so I think I was just really impressed by how inclusive he was of everyone. So that really stuck out to me. And then we did end up going on a date that time, and it was really wonderful. And again, how he handles himself was amazing, because we went to our first restaurant to eat at. It was closed, and then we had to go to the Riverwalk, which obviously, if you were there, like everything was taken. So he was going from place, looking it up, and he's the only one doing it. And it's like a group date of like 10 people. So like no one's helping him out. He's doing it.
I feel
all
overwhelmed by
himself.
those logistics.
Yes, I was so impressed. And you couldn't tell. Like, I couldn't tell he was even if he was freaking out on the inside, but he wasn't.
Were you? Do you remember?
Yes.
So I think I was just super impressed with how inclusive he was, and even when we were on the date, he was very much like asking questions about me, like really getting to know me. Eye contact, that was a big one, I think, because again,
blue eyes.
Yeah, those blue eyes stuck out to me. And so it was just very genuine. He was very genuine. He wasn't trying. He wasn't playing a game, and I think that before in my relationships, it always felt like a game. It always felt like you had to be so clever or flirt this way or say that, or like just always felt like the cat and mouse, and didn't feel that way. Very genuine, so it was great. Yeah.
So who liked you first?
Mike liked me first.
Naturally.
But naturally.
How fast, Mike? Like after that date, was it immediate? Couple months. It had to marinate a little bit. And did you? I'm not interviewing Mike, but did Mike after that date? What was your contact with him like after that? Was there text messages? Was it phone calls?
Yeah.
Was it
Faxes?
whatever? Faxes, emails, letters, written paper, like quill and oil. No,
Yeah, so this is what's really funny is I remember sending him a text after I think it was the next day after a date, sending him a text of like how much I enjoyed the date, like thank you so much, like I hope I can get to know you more, nice, all that. Just leaving him. And then it was funny because I didn't hear from him and I'm like, I did not hear from him. Granted, I didn't hear from him within hours, okay? So Miss Impulsive and Impatient.
Are you sure you didn't like him first?
Okay, I say this because I'm just so controlling and I'm like, I want to be the one that leads and controls. And so I'm like, I need to know for sure, like if he feels like he enjoyed himself just as much as me. So I'm making sure that like, just like this control, trust issues, okay? And so it was like for a couple hours, so I eventually copied the text and sent it to him again. Because I'm like, I'm making sure he sees it.
Now you could have just highlighted and put the annoying question mark.
Exactly. Yes, it was so funny. So that was hilarious because we just laugh at that a lot. Because he's like, you didn't give me any time to respond. You're like, I know, I was so foolish. And so, so how it was, this is what's really amazing is I think I didn't have to worry about our communication after that. Like I had my little, I was very insecure still. But he led the relationship with such confidence. Like I didn't have to worry about if he was going to text me or call me. Like I just trusted that. Like I trusted if he wanted to build our friendship, I would just let him follow. And so I think our contact there is, I just really put it in his court, but I also like let him know at times, like I really enjoyed our time, and so we probably talked on the phone like once a week, and then we would like Skype or video call,
Bring it back.
Skype, so good. And so it was great, and so he flew out in October, so we met in July, and he flew out in October to see me. And so that's when, that time there is what confirmed me liking him. Like that's when I liked him, was in October. Confirmed.
The feelings you had within minutes of the date.
I know.
So you knew at that point, you're like,
yes.
all those things really.
Yeah, and it was mainly because he again, the character just shined through. Like it's so easy to build a friendship long distance and then you don't see each other, and then he was there. Right. And all the things I was impressed by and stood out to me just confirmed all of that for me.
So what were some of another one I didn't tell you I was going to have, what were some of the highlights of, for lack of a better term, the courtship? Because I feel like one of the hardest things to internalize when people become Christians is this, like, how do I engage in a relationship? Because in the world there are rules and no rules. Like, it feels like, it depends on the person and their experience, but there's a lot more insecurity, obviously. And, it can get weird with the church. You're like, are there rules? Like, that's weird. Like, the Bible doesn't say anything about that. Yeah. And the way we court one another, or the way we date, or even before dating, can be a really insecure time. Like, how do we do that? How upfront am I? Like, could you just give us a short version of, like, how did he tell you how he felt? How did you guys move from the space of, like, that October trip to dating? Like, what was that like? Do you remember?
Yeah, so it was actually really funny because that trip in October, like, I just thought I was just so naive. It was hilarious. Because the thing is with Mike is he was the first guy that I had really dated that was way above, like, my status quo, if that makes sense. Like, he was just very put together. He was very confident, all these things. So he was just such a good guy that I didn't think he could like me. And so for me, it was really hard to like, okay, he likes me. Like, he had to tell me. Like, the reason he came out was because he likes me, because we went to, like, San Diego and went to all the places and people he connected with there. So that was hard for me. So I had to, like, he had to tell me, like, I came here for you because I really want to keep growing our friendship. And I was like, okay. And so that was like, all right, okay, I gotta believe that and take that to, take that for what it is. But the courtship was really great because he got really close to my best friend, Jen.
Classic.
Yeah. It was really hard because Jen's passed away 2 years ago. Yeah. It was so hard. But she was amazing. They actually got into a fight one point, so.
Mike and Jen? Yes. Did he come to blows?
No, they were just on the phone.
Okay. She hung up on me.
Yeah.
Yes. But yeah, so he just found my best friend, the person who I entrusted my life to, really. And so he was really connected with her.
Mm.
And by being connected with her, he then could be able to know the pulse of how much to spend time with me or when to come out. That person, and also he found another guy in the church who was like a dad to me. There's a family there in the church that was so crucial for me. He actually married Mike and I, which was amazing. But he was connected to Scott. And so because he had those two people that he was talking to, I just trusted the way he led our relationship over time. So he found the people that were very close to me.
It's interesting because I feel like one of the big, actually, other than the way people conduct themselves in their purity, I think the biggest difference between a relationship in the church and the kingdom and then outside is the way we involve a community of people.
Yes.
Like, people get really weird about that.
Yeah.
No, this is just mine. I'm like, is that a wise way to approach it? Now, what I hear from you is that there was wisdom in Mike's approach. I was like, okay, I'm not drawing close to these people for any manipulative reason.
Right.
Because it's my way in.
Mm-hmm.
I'm drawing close to them because it helps him to know you.
Yeah.
And also it gives a checks and balances, right?
Yes.
And that invitation, you don't want people to have to say Mike, make sure you're friends with her friends. You know what I mean? You want that to be organic.
Mm-hmm.
Because it was similar with Chris and I, it was kind of normal. It felt normal for me to be close to people she was close to because I wanted that help.
Yeah.
I wanted people to tell me things that Kristen wasn't ready to tell me. Her friend could do that. You know what I mean? Be like, yo, back up, bro. You know what I mean? Oh my God. That thing you said was super weird. I know there needs to be transparency and upfrontness, and I even encourage that, but I feel especially in that courtship stage, involving people only brings help. As long as you involve the right people.
Yes.
Because there is such a thing as being involving the wrong people, and that only makes it worse. But if you choose spiritual people that have been there, that makes a lot of sense to me. So that's great wisdom. So when you guys did start dating, you were long distance.
Yep.
And for how long were you long distance?
Very long distance for February to July.
Okay, so 5-6 months, something like that.
Yeah.
So could you walk us through I would say the other huge difference is that in relationships with two people who are following Jesus, obviously the best way to make that decision, you choose someone who you know loves God more than they want you.
Yes.
Right? That's huge. Mm-hmm. Or else boundaries will be broken. So I want to talk just briefly about boundaries because I feel like if there's a third thing, actually in some ways this is the first thing that makes people feel odd is this idea of boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, I don't think the church should legislate what the boundaries are for relationships. It can get weird, but I do think there needs to be a common wisdom and a culture about how we conduct ourselves. And so what decisions did you and Mike make so that your relationship was pleasing to God, and why did you do that?
Yeah, so because of my past, it was very easy to know what my physical boundaries were. I think the new one for me was because I was really longing to be known, and after I was a disciple, there's this new idea of emotional boundaries. And I think that one was very new for me because I had messed up so badly. I was so excited to be known by other people, but what happened is I would rush in sharing so much of my heart with other brothers that it communicated that I liked them. And so it created a lot of hurt, a lot of confusion.
Unfortunately and accidentally led on.
Yes, exactly. And I just didn't know any of that. But then it made a lot of sense to me. And so I think that one was the hardest one for me to figure out. And we put a lot of boundaries around time, how much time we spent with each other in person, but also long distance wise. We would only text so much through the week. We would talk on the phone once a week. And so it was this mutual understanding of us talking about those things. And, our physical boundaries, the only thing we did was holding hands. That was the only thing we were okay with.
For the entirety of your relationship?
The entirety of our relationship. And mainly because of my broken boundaries in the past. Because I had done that, I would be very much put in a very hard place if there was anything more. And so...
And you were afraid of yourself, a lack of self-control. You were afraid of
completely.
like over-bonding might become an idol. Like, what was it that you feared?
I feared that our relationship would just become about that.
I see.
And we had already built such a healthy, strong friendship where it was very pure. It was very much a friendship. We were known to each other in a very healthy way, that I didn't want anything of the physical to corrupt it. And I think when I studied it out in the Bible as well, like I saw that there's a time for that, and the time is in marriage, and it's not before then, which again made a lot of sense too. So our boundaries we talked about a lot, and we would always also reevaluate them too. We would be like, hey, how do you think
kind
we're
of
doing?
open, like flexible to shift them.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
You know, the idea of boundaries, again, it's the upside down nature of the kingdom of God. Like, it seems very counterintuitive, but we need people to almost help us enforce those, because I think if boundaries have no teeth, they don't exist really.
Oh, so true.
And so we need people that are going to be like,
Yes.
hey, how'd that go? Or if we come in past did you guys have a curfew?
We did. We had a curfew at 10, and I remember actually I lived with the disciples' family, and the dad, I called him Papa. We were very close. And I remember I came in the house, and it might have been a little bit past 10 or something. I'm not sure. But
10:03.
who knows? Who knows? But I was so grateful. He was like, Chucks, how'd it go? Did you enjoy yourself? I was like, yeah, I had a great time. It was so fun. He was like, okay.
Were the last 5 minutes fun though?
But he had a good point. He was like, I just noticed you guys were sitting in the car for a very long time, and I just wanted to make sure, like,
yeah, that can be danger zone.
It's very danger zone.
Sure.
And we had a boundary, which I had a boundary where I would not be in the car with him over 2 hours long.
Right.
And we would run into that in California a lot.
Yeah, unfortunately, huge state.
California's
Drive
very
faster,
huge.
Mike.
Yes. And so it was really sweet. He would actually find a friend, and we would like be in the car, and it's us, 3 or 4 together, and so it was really great.
That's their real life.
Yeah. Okay.
It's like the Christian hero in the campus. Boundaries are really, they're an interesting thing. The way I think about them is that if they have to be legislated, it's an indicator already that two people aren't ready to date, in my opinion. Because boundaries, I don't know how you're going to feel about this analogy, but this is how I thought about it. Boundaries are all about building trust.
Yes.
When we set a boundary, it matters less what the boundary is and more how we treat it and how we came to that conclusion. Now,
Totally.
I do think there are some obvious things when I think about the scriptures, because principles should drive our boundary making. There are no rules biblically, but if 2 Timothy 5 says to treat younger women as sisters with absolute purity. And Ephesians 5:3 says let there not even be a hint of sexual immorality or any impurity. These are improper for God's holy people. Let's be imitators of God as dearly loved children, and so on and so forth. And we know that sexual sin is actually more dangerous relationally than other sins. And I think that people that have conservative boundaries often can actually be criticized in the church sometimes by people that feel more liberal about their boundary making. And I'm actually pretty open-minded about how people approach that. I feel like it depends on the people, it depends on the situation, it depends on where they are and who they are. I feel very open-minded. At the same time, what I think is important is that we come to our boundary conclusions in a community of people. Like, we don't just decide them for ourselves, we do it with people.
Right.
Got to make good choices on who those people are. But then once you do that, if you don't stick to them, all you prove to one another is that you can't be trusted spiritually.
Yes.
And that actually really damages marriages. And this is the part of the analogy that I think maybe I got to find a better one. This is the best I got.
Good luck, bro.
How many of you guys have ever had a dog that would run away if you let it out in your life?
Shout out.
Not enough for this to be as powerful as I thought. But just imagine for a moment you had a dog that you love very much. But you knew that if you let it out of the fence, it would be long gone, and a lot of dangerous things happen when dogs run away, And so, in a lot of ways, boundaries are like fences you put around your relationship. If I have a dog and I give it a fence and a lot of room to run, it's super pumped, and I'm not worried at all. Because I'm like, we thought through this fence, we've made sure it's good, have a great time. You know what I mean? Like, I don't feel like I have to look at that. I always felt like that was the case with boundaries in my relationship. Like, we set these up, and no one told us what to do. We chose them, and then we got advice about them. And I wanted to submit to that advice. then at that point, I feel like within those boundaries, it was just fun.
Yeah.
Like there wasn't insecurity for me about what, like, is this okay? Is this not okay? It was more like, okay, I believe this is okay. We prayed about these, and so let's just have a great time.
Yeah.
And we built a great friend. It sounds like you and Mike just built a great friendship, and this is so cheesy. I thought about not saying it, but I heard it in a lesson one time. It was cool. That I feel like perhaps the best marriages are friendships that have caught on fire. Like it's the idea that you have great friendship and predicated on that.
Yeah.
And then it becomes something more.
Yeah.
And sometimes it starts as the hope for more, but if you focus on the friendship, I feel like out of that blossoms a lot of health. So that my last question, and then depending on time, I may ask you one more. This is probably our last one. How do you feel like the way you guys dated? You were pure, you literally only ever held hands. It's super commendable. It doesn't, of course, mean that if people choose to kiss in a pure way, which I think exists, I just think it's a tight line, that's worse. But you guys made really conservative choices because of your background.
Yeah.
I really respect that. So how do you think that sticking to those boundaries, holding to them, has impacted your marriage now? Like, fast forward with us. Because sometimes it's hard when you're talking to people, and it is so hard to date as a Christian. Maybe one of the hardest things anyone ever does.
It is, yeah.
It's hard sometimes to give them a vision of how it will impact their life later. And so maybe you can share with us, what correlations have you drawn?
Yeah, I think the correlations I've drawn is that we like you were sharing a lot about, is by having those boundaries and us really having that safeguard, because our relationship, in the dating relationship, it should feel fun, lighthearted, and easy. Like it should never feel like, oh, this is a drag or hard or it should feel very fun. And the reason why we had those boundaries on the emotionally was because there was just no rush. There was no rush for our friendship or our relationship. We just enjoyed it and it was fun. And so I think what I've seen the impact of all of that is that it's built trust in our marriage and it's built respect. And I think I've never doubted being able to I've never had this distrust of Mike, or is he gonna disrespect me or take advantage of me or whatever, because he never did that in our dating relationship. And so I think it's built this trust and respect that has been just unshakable, really, because he's shown that he will respect the things that I say that I need, or need to follow through with. Like he followed through with our boundaries, that means he's gonna follow through with this, that, or that, you know? And we also just, our relationship, and now even our marriage, we had built it around, I feel not just him upholding our purity, which I was very grateful for, which did build the trust, but also we spent time with God together. We would read our Bibles together or worship together, and we would talk about what God is teaching us. And so it helped establish our relationship is built around the center where God is the center, and we are not the center of our relationship. And so I think that was very healthy because it made me trust his relationship with God. And I think it showed again, like what you said earlier, that he loves God more than me. And he showed that in so many instances, of course, of upholding to protecting our purity, which I was grateful for. But we also had this passion for also being outward focused together. In our relationship, we would have hangouts at our apartments that we were, reaching out to people to get to know Jesus. And so we would share our faith together. And so I feel like those three things we really did in our relationship, and it's impacted because when I think of our marriage now, I'm like, wow, our life is defined by those three things. And so it's really cool to see that the foundation we built back then, it still is where we are at now in our marriage. And so, and then not only that, but how it's impacted, we would get a lot of advice, what we've talked about. I would get advice personally from the people in my life, but also we had a couple when we took our relationship seriously, we had a married couple that would disciple us. And so that was really helpful because when we would get into a fight, it would help us to learn how to be unified, learn how to understand each other and compromise, and see from different perspectives. That also, and it also cultivated humility. And by cultivating that humility early on in our dating relationship, we would now have this humility towards one another in our marriage. That doesn't go away, and we keep finding people wherever we go, because we've moved everywhere, and we've always found people to be in our lives because we see the value of that. I remember Michael, I just wanted to say I love you to Michael. And I was talking to my best friend at that time, and she's like, that's like a pretty important conversation. I think that might be good for Michael to lead. I was like, whatever, I feel it, I want to say it. She's like, I think it might be good for you to just wait and just let him lead that. And she knew me so well because I'm Miss Large and in charge. That's just who I am. I want to do it, I'm going to do it. Like, you don't tell me no. That's just not who I am. And so, and that's actually why I chose Michael, because he was the first guy that actually really said no to me. Like, he didn't tolerate my sin, really. And so I think that's why I chose him. And so I think when I said that, it was funny because, so I just saw the opportunity of having that advice. I'm like, you're right, it would be really good for me to learn how to be led. That was one of the hardest things for me to do, to be led by God and led by others, because I was raised by very strong women in my life where it's they lead your life, you do it. You don't need no man, don't need anybody to tell you what to do. Yeah. And so I thought it was a great opportunity for my character. So having that advice and waiting, and sure enough, Mike led the conversation next week or something like that. And it was wonderful. It was a sweet moment for us. But
because that friend was like, hey, Mike, you might want to conversation.
So it was really fun. So I think I've seen those factors, the discipling, his leadership in protecting our dating relationship of purity, seeking and saving the lost together, and being close with God, with one another, all those things we did, and it's still very much a part of our lives. So we were intentional. I think how intentional or what foundation you build as you're dating, you really have to consider it. You really have to think about it, and you can't do that by yourselves. You need other people to really help you think through that foundation, because it's so important.
So great. Just so much wisdom. We're out of time. But I think the thing, you said a lot that I think was really important. I think that you talked a lot about humility. And I've just seen over and over how true it is that when you conduct yourselves purely and righteously in a relationship and you're patient, it always leads to a beautiful relationship. And the marriages that have the most dysfunctional intimacy, physically or emotionally, are almost always the people who didn't have that mentality when they were dating, which is really ironic. I find it's very consistent that when people choose to be, for example, especially I've been in situations where a couple had lied for a long time and they were sleeping together in the church, but they weren't telling anybody because they were afraid of what would happen if they were open with it. And what's ironic is that they couldn't keep their hands off each other when they were dating and they were hiding it. And then when they got married and they didn't tell anybody, they had incredibly dysfunctional intimacy, which seems really backward, but I think it's because so much trust is broken. And I just really wanted to commend you and Mike. You guys are such an amazing example in this church. And I got to be I was an outlier in that relationship because Mike and I didn't live in the same place where I didn't know who you were. But I'm not even a little bit surprised at how great it went. Because of who you are and were, and obviously it's paying exponential dividends for us now, the choice you made then. And so I just wanted you to see it, for what it's worth. I don't know what you took from it, hopefully something. I think it's really important to know that church doesn't have, it's not intended to have rules tied to these things, but there are biblical principles that are non-negotiable in my mind. And I think that you've done a great job in expounding on those. So anyway, I just want to give you a round of applause. You did a great job.